Hello everybody, good morning and welcome to Live at the Waterhole, where first up we're coming to you from the old Donyo AfriCam Waterhole camera, and this is situated on over 111,000 hectares of private land in the heart of the Chulu Hills between Kenya's Tsavo and Amboseli National Park. My name is Ralph Kirsten, and starting off with some eland, one of my favorite antelope, aka the rainbow chasers. So now, as per usual, don't forget that this is a live and interactive experience, so we'd love for you to jump on board with us and send us through your questions and your comments. You can do that by going on the WildEarth website and registering. This is a particularly productive waterhole here in this part of Kenya, and we can expect to see a lot of antelope, and if we're lucky, maybe some massive Maasai giraffe, as well as big tusker elephants. So we'll have to just sit back, relax, and wait and see what comes down for a drink. I think it's quite warm here in this part of the world, so we can expect to see quite a few animals. In parts of South Africa, we've been experiencing quite a big cold front weather systems that have come through, so it's a little bit chilly in parts of South Africa, but I don't think it's reached up into this part of Kenya. So, and speaking of cold fronts and weather, I think it's time for us to go and have a look what the weather's going to be like across all the different locations. So we can always expect, when the hotter it is, the more animals that are going to come down for a drink. Obviously with us also on the show during the morning hours from 9:30 till 12:30, it's not generally conducive to having a lot of predators coming down for a drink, but you never know. And here we can expect a lot of predators that do come through, obviously in the hours of darkness. Striped hyena and lions and cheetah and leopards and all sorts. But during this time of the day, they've generally gone off for their daily naps. So we'll just have to wait and see. I really do like this camera angle that we have at Old Donyo. Very close to the ground and almost looking up at the animals, but it just gives you a wonderful perspective. Kathy Lee, you're first to comment. Thanks a lot for that, and nice to be on board once again. I've been in Amakhala for a little while. I was on the sunrise and sunset safaris, albeit that the last couple of days we've had quite inclement weather, so it was quite difficult for us to get out actually. Lots of rain, but no such rain looks like here, and I wonder what spooked this eland now. Is it something that we're going to see maybe coming through, or is that... I saw something flying there. I don't know if that was maybe a drone. Looks quite concerned with something off to the left. And the other eland seemed to be a bit concerned as well. Not always easy to see because we don't have the peripheral vision that we might have if we're there. That's one of the cons of these cameras, but there's the pros far outweigh those cons because the animals don't know that we're watching them, and there's no smell of us and they can't see us, so they really then are in their natural state. And it's been wonderful to watch here because I've had Gymnogene come down for a drink, and it actually had a little bit of a bath. That was a few weeks ago. And there was also an African hawk eagle that also came in. So I wonder if we might see some birds coming in to drink today as well. It's a lovely picture that with what I believe is a umbrella thorn directly behind that earlant, or the acacia, now the Chilia tortillas. So 458, yes, in this part of Africa, this eland is the largest of all the antelope. And they get up to between 800 and 900 kilograms, so almost a ton. But that's the big males. Here, I see there are a couple of females. I haven't seen a nice bull. Oh, and there's a gazelle. But further north in Africa, you get the giant eland, and that is the largest of all the antelope. But we don't get them down in this eastern, southern African parts. That these cameras, the Africam cameras, as well as the WildEarth dam cams, we won't be seeing any of them. And there's a monkey just off on the left. I think it's a monkey, or is it a baboon? He's just sitting atop that dead tree. It is a baboon, I think. Most likely a yellow baboon if it is so. And that gazelle, could it be a Grant's gazelle? Very long horns. I think it might be. Now, of course, these animals will be edgy. There is a high concentration of predators in these parts, and particularly so lions, lots and lots of them. So that would be the dominant predator of these eland per se. And day or night, they'd always be on their toes, literally. And so if they had any smell or any kind of sign of lions, they would be very edgy, as you can imagine. Now, there is a young bull on the right, and I think it might also be a bull on the left as well. Quite small dew laps, but still there and impressive all the same. Righty, so nice start here at Old Donyo, but remember that this is not the only camera that we do have use of. We'll be jumping around to all sorts of different spots, and I think now that we've started here, let's go and have a look at Djuma. And from the map, where you see we've changed from East Africa down all the way into Southern Africa and South Africa in specific. And this here at the Djuma Dam Cam, nice to have a herd of elephants coming down for a drink. Nice and early. Normally you would think that the elephants come down a little bit later on when it gets hotter, which they generally do in their numbers. So it's nice to have them a bit earlier today. A small breeding herd. Looks on the left there, just a heron, most likely a grey heron. moving in behind them. Maybe it thinks while the elephants are active there might be some fish activity or frogs that move in as well. They often do move into the area when buffalo or the hippos are there, the elephants are there, because they might be kicking up some of the little invertebrates in the mud. So the fish come as a result of that, and now the heron moving in as a secondary result. All the animals taking their opportunities when they arise. Does seem to be rather windy, blustery here, and I think I spoke to Cedric, who stays on Juma and works there quite regularly, and he said there was a high fire danger in these parts. So I think it's very hot, very dry, and maybe why the elephants have come down so early.
Are you WildEarth's biggest fan? Well, we have a brand new competition for you. Join our naturalists on Safari Live and listen out for weekly questions. To enter the competition, head over to our Instagram, search #WildEarthFanOfTheMonth and comment your answer under the post. The monthly winner will be determined by the total quickest and most correct answers. We announce our winner at the end of every month. Tune in to Safari Live daily.
And as always, the animals taking their opportunities, like I was speaking about the heron. Now you see, if you look closely, you'll see a fork-tailed drongo just buzzing in and around those elephants there as they walk, specifically, because they'll be bumping up insects as well, but not from the water, just around the grass. And you see that drongo there as they do move. He's following them. There's a couple of them actually, making use of these big animals, and when they put their feet down, the insects are trying to get out of their way and straight into the mouths of the fork-tailed drongos. You can really see from the wobbles on the camera that the wind is quite significant there. And so that's the moves and shakes that you're getting. Okay, so one fantastic sighting leads to another. Lovely to have elephants so early here at Djuma, but as always, there's lots of activity at Old Donyo. Where we've got our Maasai giraffe, as well as the old East African oryx, now called the fringe-eared oryx. And that was one of the mistakes that I made in assuming that they're still called East African oryx. But the beauty of this Waterhole show, and with Africam involved as well, is that we get viewers that can also just correct us. And so one of the viewers wrote in and said it's no longer called the East African oryx, it's now the fringe-eared oryx. So whoever that was, thank you very much for that information, and we'll continue on trying to be as correct as possible. So if anything is incorrect, please, we're not perfect, we're not claiming to be so all the time. And if you pick up anything that we are saying incorrect, please send it through. And that's the whole idea of this interactive experience. There was another viewer that also commented about the Okukuyu waterhole in Namibia, because apparently there were naturalists that aren't so familiar with that particular spot. I've worked there for over 20 years, so I consider myself a Namibian specialist. But it was stated that the Oshuvambo people in Namibia had watched the show and said that we were pronouncing it incorrectly. But I have confirmed with Oshivambu friends of my own that indeed Okakuyu is the correct pronunciation. I'm not sure how the other naturalists were pronouncing it. It is not an easy word to pronounce if you just read it. And also if you go on the phonetic pronunciation that you might find online, they sort of describe it incorrectly. Okuyu. It was all sorts of different weird ways that they explained it, but the correct name is Okakuyu. We were looking at the common or South African oryx at at Amakhala yesterday in the Eastern Cape. Myself and Morgan, my camera operator, and I was saying to him that imagine having a built-in back scratch, which is exactly what the oryx have, with those almost extra appendages on top of their head, and they can scratch their back almost right to the exact location of where they have an itch. And it's just quite special to see. Now there's still a bit of nervousness from the animals, and you see the giraffe looking in the same direction of where the eland were. So Picasso giraffe have reasonably good eyesight, and also with their height advantage, they can see for quite far. Their eyesight is better than ours as humans, only not a lot better, but it is a little bit better than ours. And obviously, with that height advantage, it gives them an excellent point to be looking down from. So they often are some of the first animals to pick up predators. They're coming in from a distance. And with the awkward nature of them having to bend down like this when they go for a drink, it's really important for them to make sure that there aren't any predators around, because you can see how prone the animal is now. And if a lion was able to sneak up on this giraffe, it would be able to obviously get it on the neck as well. So they do need to be very careful, and that's exactly what they are. And it's also interesting to note that with the fringe-eared oryx, or the old East African oryx, the color is a little bit more drab than your South African or the common oryx or gemsbok. And we were looking at them, as I said, yesterday, and their colors are a lot more striking. They're a lot more contrasting. You've got a real solid dark blacks and whites, whereas, as I say, a little bit more of a sort of grey, orangey color with these fringe-eared oryx. And of course the mandatory flicks with the giraffe after they drink, still trying to work out exactly why they do that. It looks like lots of bird activity as well. I think mostly, it's quite difficult to see because they're moving so fast, but I think it's mostly ring-necked doves. And you will notice that very often these giraffe will be more relaxed when there's more of them around, which is understandable. There's more eyes and ears. he does seem to be doing something with the soil there. So when the elephant moves in, the animals, the rest of them, do take a little bit of a back seat. But I've also seen when the zebras have had enough, they all just group together and then start dominating the waterhole and push the elephants into the back seat. And it seems like today they're waiting their turn. So we do spend a lot of time here at the Africam Old Donyo, but that's just because it's such a well-visited waterhole. With the other locations, we will go there, but not if there's not really much happening. So if you were trying to understand why we spend so much time here, that's the reason. So decent sized tusker on this elephant bull, but there are some elephants here that have massive tusks and what we would call a big tusker. This is sort of an average sized bull. He might still have a bit of growing to do, but nothing close to some of the individuals that we might see here. So I'm intrigued what the elephant is doing there. Is it water that it's sucking up? It could potentially be what I've seen at a lot of the water holes, especially these ones that are topped up with fresh water and where they keep water in them, that the elephants go where the water is actually coming out of the pipes or whatever it might be. And I wonder if that's what he's doing. So a little bit of a frozen screen there. Just remember that these are remote locations and sometimes the signal is affected by adverse weather conditions or whatever it might be. I'm sure we'll be able to go back to the Africam Old Donyo at some stage. It was wonderful there, but just with that freeze frame, we've headed on over to what I was talking about earlier at Okukuyu in the Etosha National Park of Namibia. Little bit quiet for now, but this seems to be the rhythm that we find at this particular waterhole. It's normally around 10:30, heading towards 11 or so, that the concentrations of animals really does pick up. Normally have the odd springbok at this time of the morning. Generally those guinea fowl are also there, just foraging in and around the elephant dung. They've moved off now, but off in the distance there is a bit of movement of animals, and I'm sure they'll be making their way down for a drink. Always listen out as well first up for the Namakwa sandgrouse. that come in for a drink and soak of the feathers, particularly the males, to go back to their nest and give their chicks a drink, which they literally sort of pull off the feathers that have been soaked by the males. Looks to be a black-faced impala on the opposite bank. One of the only places in the world that you will get to see these species of impala. There seems to be a little bit of an easterly breeze, and with that you can see a little bit of a haze in the air. So I would say that it's probably a nice hot day in Etosha and perfect conditions for the animals to come down for a drink. And something to note in the Etosha National Park is that there is no off-road driving permitted whatsoever. So there is a good network of roads for game viewing. It can be a little bit frustrating when you're out on game drives because you often have to see animals from a distance. But from the animals' perspective, it's a wonderful sanctuary, and there's not that amount of pressure that you might get in other national parks and so on, where there is off-road driving that does enable guests to have very close-up views of the animals, but sometimes there can be that element of intrusion into their natural space where that does not occur in any way whatsoever in this national park. So a nice black-faced impala ram, all on his own, come in for a drink. Just off on the right, lots of ring-necked doves, and birchells or plain zebra, seemingly making their way down for a drink as well. Now that he's had his drink, he'll probably make his way back towards the tree line, back into the thickets. They're not completely comfortable out in the open like this, as are the kudu. They generally come in, have their drink, and then move back to where they feel a lot better in those more heavily vegetated areas. And here, obviously, you can see there's hardly any plants in any life form. The trees that once were there have been pushed over by the elephants. It's only the leadwood, that nice big one off on the left of this waterhole, that still survives. Righty, so nice to have a lovely contrast from east to west, from the Oldonyo Africam in Kenya to this Okukuyo Dam Cam in Namibia. And I think now it's time for us to go to the Madikwe Game Reserve and Africam Tau. So we're in South Africa, but just on the border with Botswana, and we can see our crocodiles or flat dogs are out trying to get some energy in the sun, and there's our white-faced whistling ducks just moving through on the bottom right of your screen. I think that's also a red-knobbed coot. Egyptian goose, just resting up on one leg to the left of the crocodiles. Nice big individuals these crocodiles are, but I would say that crocodiles are probably one of the least most exciting animals to view, unless they're in the water itself hunting or displaying for mating or whatever it might be. But I can pretty much guarantee you we're not going to see much movement from these guys here on the bank. But if they do, well, it would be a bonus. You see that one up top left, its mouth a little bit open, which does indicate that it's actually heated up quite nicely and would just be thermoregulating a bit with that mouth open like that. So it's a good indication that we might have some activity from them because it's hot enough. Being a reptile, ectothermic, they take all their energy from outside sources. And just as I say that, we see the one that had its mouth open move its head and shut its mouth. Let's see. So Abigail, that's the thing with crocodiles, you never do know. They lie still like this for days, sometimes even weeks, and the birds and the animals in general become a little bit lackadaisical around them, and that strike that comes could come at any time, and when it does happen, it's extremely fast. And yes, they can absolutely take birds as well. I've seen them take waterfowl as well as guinea fowl and all sorts, but it's just that pure way that they lie around dead still, and the animals then almost forget about them and don't believe that there's any danger. But it's still a real big possibility. So that crocodile now, he moved his head a bit and opened his mouth up even more. And that's even more of an indication that he's getting nice and hot. Maybe we'll see him move down into the water at some stage. So I've had lots of interaction with crocodiles, mainly, boating and fishing in all across southern Africa. But one of the stories that I remember was we were at Farney's Island, which is part of the Isimangaliso World Heritage Site, or the St. Lucia Lake System. And Farney's Island was quite a shallow lake, so we were on my uncle's boat and we were driving very slowly, and I was young, my cousin and myself, we were sitting on the front of the boat on the nose because we were going so slowly, and we had our feet in the water. And as we were driving, we sort of noticed the water is very clear, and we were looking at the prawn holes and little fish swimming away from the boat as we were going. And suddenly we noticed this pattern in the water, and we were both staring at it, and it was quite intriguing as we were moving over it. And suddenly we realized that pattern was actually the back of a crocodile, a huge one. And when we realized that it was a crocodile, it realized that we were right above it. And our feet went up in a millisecond onto the boat, and this crocodile exploded. It sprayed us with water, because I think everybody got as big a fright as the next. And so it will always sit in my mind. And whenever I see crocodile lying like that and I see the patterns on their back, it reminds me of that day on the boat at Farney's Island. Farney's Island, Charters Creek, all part of that Lake St. Lucia system. Right, so other than quite a bit of bird activity and obviously those crocodiles on the bank, a little bit quiet here and also quite windy. There's an African spoonbill next to a heron, but I think it's time for us to go back to Kenya and Africam Old Donyo. Where our freeze frame has worked itself out, and the elephant, Bull, is still drinking in that favoured spot, it seems, on the opposite bank. The zebra still waiting their turn, or maybe just milling about. I wonder if they are going to come down and drink at all. But the giraffe also quenching its thirst.
On Woodbury Lodge's episode of Destination Safari.
I'm so used to views I forget to mention it sometimes. Underfloor heating in the bathrooms, air conditioning, all those luxury items.
Dinner is a full three-course meal, starter, main and dessert.
Early morning drive, and on that drive you might see some slightly different things, some rare things.
Destination Safari, bringing luxury safari travel to the world.
Now, today there is a little bit of clarity, or it's not as sort of hazy as it has been in the previous times that I've been on the show here. But off there in the distance, you can see Mount Kilimanjaro. Fantastic. I think it does look like there is a little bit of snow right on the peak. Otherwise, the clouds just around it. But that's the first time I've been able to see it. And I think something that is very commendable in Kenya is that they don't have the likes of the kind of fenced parks that we have in southern Africa per se. Most of the areas open to both humans, livestock, as well as the wildlife. So there's this shared space and understanding from the communities that the wildlife do bring a massive value and economic input to the country at large. So there's not as much human wildlife conflict that we do have when we've restricted the wild animals to particular spots and then the humans in others. There's more of an understanding and living together approach here in Kenya, which I think is fantastic. With that being said, don't be surprised if here we may see some domestic animals coming past. There can be some cattle and livestock, and sometimes even humans walking through. And there might even be some domestic dogs and cats. But that's not to take away from the wildlife experience that exists. And I think that that is a real illustration of how that it is possible to have these wilderness areas open to communities. It's not to say that I think we should do that in southern Africa, because that would be a drastic change to the current status quo, and I think the human wildlife conflict would increase massively. It would have to be a very slow sort of process, but I think it's the kind of principle that we could strive towards. It always does remind me of the desert elephants in Namibia as well, because those elephants are not fenced in. The only sort of barriers that they do come across is when they get to fenced areas, but they move through community land. And in a lot of the ephemeral rivers, like the Uchab, the Huab, the Guantachab, the Huarusib, the Huanib, the Hereros and the Damaras, they have a lot of cattle that they graze in those areas too. And very often we find the elephants feeding with cattle around them. And I always remember the elephants sort of, and the big bulls in particular, they go to the false acacia or the anaboom and they shake the tree to get the pods to all fall down like sweeties, and then the elephants start eating the pods. But the cows, they all come because they know what the elephants are doing and they know the potential for food when they're doing it. So they hang around, and when the elephant shakes the tree, they also get stuck into the seed pods. So it's wonderful to see those domestic animals mixing in with the wildlife in pretty much harmony. Larissa, you and me both. I love watching Ellies, and they really seem to spend a lot of time here at this waterhole. Sometimes just milling about, and they get a bit of a drink here and there, but they seem to like being around this water. Elephants do love water, but obviously this waterhole is not going to be conducive to them having a real swim. But I think there's always water here. And you can see with the elephant also just putting its ears out. It's probably just getting or catching the breeze from behind. So that's helping keeping it cool. And then it's saving its energy as well. Not having to waft its ears. Just make use of the wind. I always like referring to the elephant's ear flaps like that as like a radiator on a car. And you know, when your car's overheating, you generally want to park your vehicle standing into the wind, and let it so that the airflow goes over all of those little fins. And if that's not you're not able to do that, you actually do need to drive a little bit just to get that wind flow, and then help the vehicle to start cooling down. And it's exactly the same with the elephants. That's almost the exact same principle. With them putting the ears out like that and the extreme network of blood flow in the back of the ears, it then cools the blood to the brain. So if it's windy and it just points its ears out and the wind is then blowing over it, no need for the wafts, just like the radiator on your vehicle. And a baboon moving through nonchalantly in the background. Yes, we see you. What are you up to? Being naughty as usual, I'm sure. And itchy and scratchy. That's why these baboons, all baboons, I find incredibly amusing to watch. Looks like they've found something to feed on there. I wonder if it's insects. No, it looks like something bigger. Shame you can't see when we've zoomed in like that. Also, the camera doesn't want to focus quite on the point that we're looking at, but also the heat waves that are coming up off the ground. Oh, here's a big male. And there's a baby riding jockey style on its mom's back.
Not everyone gets excited to hear a leopard chuff, spot a pangolin, or see a real impala rut. But if you are wild about the wild, you can become part of a community of like-minded nature lovers and share authentic wildlife experiences with the world. Join the Explorers Club and you will also enjoy the many benefits that come with it too. WildEarth Explorers, it's in your nature.
So our mission here at WildEarth is to connect the world with nature. And if you'd like to help us in our quest, you can go onto the WildEarth website and click donate. A little bit of action there in the background and dust being kicked up, and I think it's the oryx chasing each other around. I may be mistaken, but I think that's what caused the ruckus there. Looks like this elephant may now have had enough. Either that, or it could be another approaching elephant. We'll have to just wait and see. You know, when I see the elephant probing around the edges of the water, and maybe it's taking up some of that soil. You know, obviously at a waterhole there will be a lot of mineral salts that are, especially along the edges of the water, with the evaporation taking place. So it might be something that's being a part of the equation. So Lorenzo, who's 10 years old, thanks for your question. I'd say the camera is probably around 30 meters or so away from these animals. And we have zoomed in, but it is quite close to this waterhole. And some of the other waterholes are a little bit further away, but this one is very impressive because of how close it is and also how close to the ground it is. So that's why the animals look so big, is because we're looking almost from ground level up at them. When you see the other waterholes, some of them are on a pole looking down, some are on a tree. There's all sorts of different attaching points where they put the cameras. But because we're looking up here, the animals are very big. When you're looking down on them, you'll see that they do look a lot smaller than they would if you're looking up. I like it from this perspective because this is how it looks when you're there in person. So if you were standing there, this is how it would look. When you're looking down on them, it's almost like when you would be on a vehicle or on a game drive, and then the animals don't seem as big. But as soon as you jump off the vehicle and look at them where you're standing, suddenly they look so much bigger. Alrighty, so as amazing as this is, we've spent quite a bit of time with this elephant bull here at Africam Old Donyo, but we're going to keep jumping around. We don't want to not see the other locations, so I think it's time to go back to Africam Tau. Now remember that Tau in Setswana, which is what they speak in Botswana, and the people there are Motswana. Tau meaning lion, and so this lodge named after being the place of the lion. They do have lots of lions here, and regularly spotted. If we're lucky, we may see them coming down to drink here, but as I say, especially when it's very hot, it's not conducive for seeing predators. They've got a very high heart rate, and moving around in the heat of the day is exhausting. So generally, lions would be sleeping now, and in fact they can sleep up to 20 hours a day. So when we say lion around, well, that's mostly what they do. And very often when you go out on game drive, especially after the hours around sunrise and sunset, if you find lions, it's normally quite a boring sighting because they're just lying around in the shade. You might see an ear flick or a tail movement, or they might roll over, but that's about it. So it's better to find them when it's getting dark, or if it's a cold day, then you might see them very active. But on a hot day, you can pretty much bet your bottom dollar that they're not going to be active at all. So we've got blue wildebeest, and you see there just off the side of that bush there, lots of weavers' nests. And I've noticed that the weavers have started to rebuild all of their nests, sometimes from scratch, sometimes using their previous season nest and just renovating a little bit, fixing up the entrance, adding a bit of fresh grass. And you can notice this because you see the brown nests and nice fresh grass that has been placed in certain places. So it's a real good indication that we're heading now into spring, and the birds are starting to get their breeding plumage. They're starting to try and attract females, building of nests, building up food caches to try and attract females. So it's an exciting time that we're going into now. Right, so there seems to be more animals slowly starting to trickle through here at Tau, but let's give them a chance to build up in numbers. And for the time being, I think let's go on over just outside of Kimberley to Afrikam, Kamferstam. Where we've got an explosion of colors, and most notably from these lesser and greater flamingos, one of the most amazing places to see them and a wonderful sanctuary for these birds. Yes, so remember that this Kamfersdam is a privately owned permanent water body of around 400 hectares, and it's situated to the immediate north of Kimberley, which is also known as the Big Hole, the largest hand-dug hole in the world. And these flamingos are protected in this area, and there's a few people, including the ECPA mining environmentalists, that rescue any flamingos that get injured. And it's also near to some human habitation, so sometimes there can be a bit of movement of humans, but we'll report any of that if it's seen, and helped in the conservation of these wonderful birds. And thousands, it's mostly the lesser flamingos, use this dam as one of only 4 breeding sites in Africa. But heading into the period around September, October, we can expect up to 50,000 of them, and they're going to start nesting as well. So once again, this is going to be a very exciting time for us, particularly here at Kamfersdam, but also with all the birds in general, because we're going to have all the migratory birds returning, and all of them also going into breeding plumage. It's that time of the year. Wonderful to watch also when they take off. You see that they're not the best lift-off birds, so they literally run on the top of the water as they flap their wings, and it's quite comical, but fantastic to see. Also keep a lookout, because along the water's edge we might see some of the pied avocets just foraging along that areas. So keep an eye out. I must say that I don't think flamingos would ever get hiccups, because if one of the cures of hiccups is drinking water upside down, well, they permanently feed upside down. So I think if they did get hiccups, they'd cure it almost instantly. And that flamingo is off to the races. Now look, just off to the left, it's a little bit of displaying. You see the very long neck of that greater flamingo, and they turn left to right, and left and right, and back and forward, back and forward. It's all part of that display. I've seen a lot of comical voiceovers of when these greater flamingos are doing this particular display of looking backwards and forwards. But when there's lots of them all doing it, you should have a look online on YouTube. There's lots of interesting voiceovers of this exact display.
Get ready for your daily dose of African wildlife magic. Be enchanted by the intimate moments shared by the animals as they drink, play, and interact in their natural habitat. With our daily wildlife videos, you'll experience the thrill of safari adventures without ever having to leave your seat. Let the wild adventure unfold right before your eyes. Africam, always live, always wild.
So we're going to start seeing more and more of this display type behavior from these flamingos as we start heading into the breeding season. So as I say, very interesting times ahead. And what I must say is also what is notable is the real diversity that we're now able to access with all these different dam cameras, Africam locations, where we go from the desert of Namibia to the tropical environment in Kenya. And then, here in South Africa with the flamingos, it's just adding a real dimension that never existed before, and it's fantastic. So nice time spent with the flamingos and all their antics and goings on. But I think it's time for us to switch of place. So let's go to one of my favorite places in the Etosha National Park. North central part of the country itself. And as I suggested earlier, the longer the day goes on, the hotter it gets, the more animals are going to come down for a drink. Here's a nice big herd of blue wildebeest, and they're joined by some swimming springbok, who generally are one of the best swimmers here, them and the oryx. Some oryx there as I speak of them on the opposite bank. And we might be able to see what I was speaking about earlier of the difference between that fringe-eared oryx and what they call the South African oryx, or I'd like to call them more so the Southern African oryx. I think when they may have called them the South African oryx, Namibia per se was still another province of South Africa before their independence in 1990. So maybe that's why they've called it, or it was called that. Let's refer back to the Latin as always, which is more neutral. It's the oryx gazella. But what I was speaking of are the contrasts in these oryx gazella. It's a little bit more profound than that on the fringe-eared oryx, who's a little bit more bland in color and not as striking as these individuals.
Those sounds just go straight through you.
And you see these oryx also taking in a lot of water, as well as the springbok. They'll probably only drink once a day, so they do take in quite a bit. But remember, both of these species can actually survive with not drinking water for their entire lives. If it's available, they will drink, as you see here. But it's amazing also that, and interesting, that the two species that can survive without drinking water at all are the ones that seem to enjoy it the most. Because every day we see the oryx and the springbok really going in the deepest, sometimes going for a complete swim. I think the ones the only other animal that enjoys it as much as them, maybe even more, are elephants. But everybody else seems to just come for their drink and leave, whereas they like to go into the middle, swim around a bit, and there's almost a real pleasure to it. You can sense it. So, for instance, we do get oryx in the Eastern Cape and the likes of the Amakhala Game Reserve, where we also do broadcast from on the sunrise and sunset safaris, but it's not the ideal place for them. They are so well adapted to arid conditions that they don't do well, particularly when it's wet and cold for prolonged periods. So that humidity and the cold really does, give them problems because they're so adapted to living in very dry conditions. And this area of Namibia is it's absolutely ideal for them. Sometimes do get Kori bustards coming down to drink here as well, one of the special birds. But we don't generally see it at many of the other locations, and particularly drinking. So if we're lucky, who knows? Bundu Basha, so you're in agreement. I think they really do enjoy swimming. And if you contrast that with seeing them in the desert, well, this is also part of the desert. It's more of a rocky desert. But when you think of a true desert, you obviously always think of sand dunes, etc. Even though that's not the definition of a desert, it's normally accompanied by that kind of scenario. And you see them down in the south, in Sossusvlei, where there's hardly any vegetation. There's definitely no water. And then you contrast them with this swimming antics, and it's just chalk and cheese. There is also the element of them getting into the middle of the waterhole itself to get away from the edge where there's a lot of trampling and kicking up of the mud. So I think the water tastes a lot better. But I think they're combining that with the pleasure of cooling down and maybe also just the feeling of the water on their skin. So I think it's a combination. I was just about to say that I haven't seen an oryx today with only one horn, but now I've noticed that one of those oryx in the water, he hasn't quite only got one horn, but he's got 1 1/4. Most likely have been broken off with fights with other males. He's not quite a unicorn, he's a 1 1/4. You'll obviously see there, that's a pied crow, black and white bird, and you'll also hear them as well, called a crowy call, one of the common birds that you'll find here at this waterhole. There's a blacksmith lapwing in the foreground, also resident, and just off in the background I think it's a grey heron. Just moving through the shallows, probably looking for any tadpoles, frogs, maybe even little fish. I don't think it's the best place for a heron to live. I think it's a bit of slim pickings here in this waterhole itself, and because the salinity is very high as well, it's not conducive to big populations or many different species of fish and frogs. There's only a few that can survive this salinity levels. So it's quite interesting to note as well, because when you go to Etosha, the tap water is drinkable, although it's got quite a salty taste to it. So most people don't enjoy it. However, what I normally do is I just add a few drops of lemon juice, and it just changes the flavor slightly, that it's more pleasurable. But even though it doesn't taste nice, this water, when I drink it, it's very hot here in this part of the country and Namibia in general. So you do sweat a lot, and very easy to dehydrate. So you need to replace those mineral salts that that you lose when you sweat. You can't just drink water. It's the salts that are important to replace as well. And the water in Etosha has both. So you get water and salts when you drink, and I've always felt very rejuvenated, especially after a long day, lots of sweating, without, in vehicles with no air conditioner, of course, but I prefer to keep the windows open anyway, so that we can hear the sounds of the bush. So there is that element. You lose a lot of mineral salts, but when you drink the water, it rejuvenates you very quickly, almost like having a rehydrate, which is sugar and salts that you can replace that with. But I'm pretty sure that the animals would also have that kind of effect, and it does assist in the minerals that they achieve from the water as well. You can see that easterly breeze is becoming a little bit more fresh and blowing over the waterhole itself towards the Atlantic Ocean and the cold Benguela current. And I can tell you there's nothing cold about this wind. The east wind is a hot wind. It's what you would call a berg wind. It's not always super hot. The wind, I mean, here in Etosha, as it goes over the desert, it does pick up or increase in temperature, but it's not a cold wind. That's what I can tell you. Nice little group of kudu now moving in on the opposite bank, going to their preferred spot just off the leadwood on the left hand side. So you see those kudu, they do walk into the water, but that's probably about the deepest they go. I haven't seen many going into the water, nothing like the springbok, who like to swim around the water, even in the deepest parts where it's obvious they can't touch the bottom. The oryx walk right into the middle, but they're tall enough, I think, just to still not have to swim. But there's not really any of the other animals that do that.
Do you love relaxing at a waterhole with the sights and sounds of Africa all around you? Well, we have some really exciting news for you. From August 1st, Africam is joining forces with WildEarth to bring the majesty of Africa right into your living room with 9 incredible new waterhole cameras from across South Africa and Kenya. Get ready to embark on a new journey. This is Live at the Waterhole.
So helmeted guinea fowl, very similar to your domestic chicken in how they feed. They scratch around. They are omnivorous. They'll feed on pretty much anything. And so I wonder what they're feeding on the edge of the waterhole there. If there's some seeds or what, I don't know. But they definitely are feeding. They are so much like domestic chickens that to domesticate a guinea fowl, it's as easy as taking some eggs from, it would obviously wherever a nest was found, and putting that in with chickens to incubate, and then they grow up with the chickens, and then they'll obviously, be habituated from then, and then they can breed domestically as well, which is known. And we do know that guinea fowl now have been introduced pretty much around the world. I think mainly for their meat, but could also be for their eggs. A little bit more of a gamey flavor to them, slightly more or richer than chicken eggs. I love their colorful faces. Very blue with that red helmet. Do look like Roman soldiers or gladiators. What do you think? I find guinea fowl very comical as well, especially when they run. It's only their legs that move. Their head stays deadly still, and so does their body. And then these little sticks below them, just sometimes moving them at high speed, but I find it very funny. Dave Wilson, thanks for your comment. Yeah, guinea fowl are rather unique. They're special, and they're always fun to watch. Cute, yeah, if you'd like to say so. But yeah, I suppose it's like some people find warthogs cute, baboons as well. I suppose it's all in the eye of the beholder, but fascinating nonetheless. So it seems like they're doing just a bit of grazing, eating grass there. Probably just picking off the tips. And you can see as they feed, there's always one that's got its head up. So it's a little bit of a sort of group behavior that you can relax for a while, but every now and then you need to stick your head up to have a scan, and then you can go back to feeding again. And then in so doing, if it's random, there's always somebody looking out for the rest. This is actually a wonderful sighting. We don't often get to spend much time with the guinea fowl, like in this kind of scenario, because with a vehicle, you're not really able to get as close to them. And so that's one of the real positives and bonuses of these remote cameras. That the animals don't know we're there, and we can have lovely sightings like this. Annette, yeah, so you obviously agree with me. Nice close-ups. And as I say, not always that easy to achieve. So it's fabulous that we're able to access these cameras, and that the animals don't know we're there makes it even better. So guinea fowl also, they can have a high prevalence of fleas, and I've seen guinea fowl performing what we call anting, and I think it does assist in their feather maintenance, but also I think with the formic acid that is released by the ants that they irritate and then climb all over them, I think that also assists in parasite eradication. So it's interesting to see when they do that as well. You'll often see them when there's an ant nest, they'll go on top of it and sort of dust bathe right there. And then the ants attack. But you can see that the birds, they love it. I think that formic acid getting in down to their skin, in between the feather follicles, I think it's quite pleasurable for them, but also an advantage or assistance in eradication of those pesky parasites. Also interesting to note that if you're not South African, you would not know that the Afrikaans name for a guinea fowl is, and particularly a helmeted guinea fowl, is a tarantaal. And it's very descriptive because of the way that they call. It's a tarantaal. And they, that's a big part of their call. Another part of it is a whistle, which they often use as sort of a contact call, whereas that tarantal part is more of an alarm call. But both heard very regularly, but just nice to know that in Afrikaans they call it a tarantaal. Okay, so lovely time spent with guinea fowl, and one of the best sightings I've ever had of them. So that's wonderful, but I think it's time we leave these guys, as it seems like most of them have left. And we're going to stay in South Africa, but we're going to change of reserve and of province. Let's go to the Northwest Province, to Madikwe and Jamala. So this waterhole is further south from the African Tau Lodge, which is further north in the reserve itself, closer to the Botswana border. This area very well visited by elephants and buffalo and impala, zebra, blue wildebeest, the chacma baboon as well, in comparison to the yellow baboons that you get in Kenya. We've also seen wild dogs here. Just before the show started, unfortunately, they didn't hang around long enough for us to make them famous, but we can expect to have a good chance of seeing them here at any stage, day or night. But what I am hoping for is the nice big herds of elephant. I think at one stage we had over 100 of them at this waterhole altogether. Right here, apologies for that. It seems our controls are not playing ball there in Jamala, Madikwe. So we've gone back to our trusty old favorite, Initosha. Something to note that this is the busiest time of the year in Etosha itself and Namibia in general. So if you ever think of going on holiday in Namibia and you want to go around the months of July, August, September in particular, you need to book at least a year in advance, otherwise you will be disappointed. But it's also does mean that there's lots of people in the park currently now, and Okukuyu will be jam-packed. So if you do hear any voices in the background, it is just safari goers and tourists enjoying the exact same picture that we are looking at right now. And during the middle of the day, which we're sort of in now, everybody's had their breakfast, they've already been on morning game drive, and then there can be quite a bit of activity here next to this waterhole, and you might hear some chitter chatter. But the animals do not take any notice. This viewing point has been here for decades, so the animals are quite used to the noise sometimes, which can be excessive at times. You might hear some kids and some rowdy tourists, but all I can say is that from over 20 years of visiting this particular waterhole and seeing and hearing the amount of noise that can be present, even though sometimes it is a little bit rude, because we prefer there to be a bit more quiet and enjoying the wilderness sounds, it literally does not make a difference to the animals. It obviously impacts people's experience, but from the animals' perspective, they just carry on about their business. So Catherine, you've been to Namibia in October, November when it's nice and hot. That for me, the later part of being in Namibia, or later part of the year, and if the rains come later, it's even better because it becomes drier, it's hotter, drier, and the animals concentrate more around the water holes. So it just gets better and better the longer it takes for the rains to come. It can be a little bit uncomfortable because it can get seriously hot, and it's the hottest when the storm or rain clouds build and it looks like it wants to rain, but it fails to deliver because of that extreme heat that comes with the incoming storm. And if it dissipates and doesn't rain, it can be incredibly hot, and a lot of people really struggle in that. That for me is my ideal environment. I can't handle the cold, especially cold and humid. I prefer hot and dry.
Did you hear? The schools are out. Yep, it's time for the school holidays, and WildEarth is celebrating with special content just for kids. Join us from the 21st to the 25th of August for 5 days of fun. Our guides will be taking on a number of survival tasks, and together we'll learn how to survive in the wilderness, build things, and have fun in the wild too. WildEarth Kids, it's in your nature.
And so when I say big concentrations of game, that's when it's dry, when it hasn't rained. If it rains in the Etosha National Park, it can almost result in the animals seemingly vanishing because they disperse and they hang around more so their feeding grounds, and they drink water from puddles. So it just means that you don't have the concentrations of game around the water holes, and so makes game viewing a lot more difficult. However, once it has rained, it does transform the park into a vast grassland. It's incredible, but it doesn't last very long. Maybe 2 to 3 weeks, a month max, and then it returns to this white and brown colors. So lovely to see the park in that particular time after the rains, but don't expect to have the most amazing sightings.
Der eine Schakal hat dann nicht gemerkt, dass der kommt. Aber in diesem Moment, wo du den so nimmst, du hörst einen so. Weg. Ja, geht dann mit den auch so im Maus. Einbissen, weg. Der hat so im Maul gehabt, gestanden, den anderen gezeigt, seht ihr, was mit euch passiert, wenn die an mein Futter rankommen.
So the continuous ebb and flow of animals coming in and out here at the waterhole. But it's a little bit of an ebb now, with a lot of the animals having left. There's some more still approaching on the left there, but I think another change of location, and let's try again at Jamala. Where it seems now the camera is playing along, and nice little group of wildebeests. They do seem to eat grass here, just a little sort of base or whatever is sticking out from the surface of the soil, but a lot of geophagia occurs here. It seems the animals like to eat the soil in this exact spot. So whether they're eating grass or eating dirt, or maybe a mixture of both, I'm not quite sure, but this is where it all goes down. And now you can see with a bit more perspective that there's a lot more animals than we thought. So having left Etosha, which is arid, and considered desert, this part of southern Africa, this is more semi-arid. It's also part of the greater Kalahari system or desert, but there's a lot more rainfall that falls in these parts, although it's particularly dry currently. So you'll also have the concentrations of game around the waterholes for that exact reason. You can see, looking at the landscape, that it really needs some rain. So hopefully when spring rolls in, you're going to get a good amount of rain, and so then it will help to support all these animals with the vegetation growth that will result. With it being so dry, there's not a fantastic amount of food availability, and what is available is not of very good quality. So the animals need to find a bit of supplementation. And so what we find is the animals then do feed on dirt, and particularly around water holes such as this, where there's the mineral salts that they can access. And so I think there's a bit of both going on here. There's the daily supplement dose, as well as a bit of just pulling out the roots and so on of the grass, trying to get some food in. Nice to see so many blue wildebeest and zebra and impala. A nice amalgamation. I'm just hoping that we get those elephants coming through. It's about that time, so any minute now. So Madikwe Game Reserve, it's around between 75 and 80,000 hectares. So it's a rather large reserve, especially when you think of the likes of the Traverse at Djuma in the Sabi Sands. That's only 1,000 hectares. Very high concentration of large predators, but compare it to the size of Madikwe, and it's tiny. It's not fenced, obviously, so that's open to the Greater Kruger, which is over 1 million hectares in size. So it's not really comparing apples with apples, but in a sense, I just wanted to give you an idea of the size of this reserve. And then with it being around that size, they say just over 1,500 elephants, which they think is beginning to become a bit of a problem, and overpopulation. And then you start to have vegetation destruction, which then impacts and knocks on to a lot of the other species. And therein lies the problem. We've sort of moved away from the idea and principle or concept of culling, which is an easy way of controlling elephants' numbers, but not that ethical and not socially acceptable. So the numbers have been allowed to grow. There is the idea of contraception, but it does then have a social impact on the elephants themselves within the groups, whether it's the males that receive vasectomies or the females that receive the contraception. It does create issues within the elephant groups themselves, socially and structurally, because they're not really performing their life's function, which is to reproduce. So it's not an ultimate solution either. Then translocating or relocating some of them, the excess numbers, also a problem. It's very expensive, and the transportation of you would want to move an entire herd. You can't split them up because then you're going to have social issues as well wherever they land up, and they might not fit in with the next group that they arrive or at the reserve. So you want to move entire herds, which is not exactly feasible. Too expensive. Plus, a lot of the other reserves are sitting with the same problem. So, where does that leave us? We are obviously going to have to just sit back, wait, and see what happens. But I do believe that it's going to be quite calamitous in the beginning, because you have an increase in the elephant population. They're going to impact heavily on the vegetation. And that's going to impact the other species as well. So you eventually going to have a decline in the quality of the grazing and erosion, etc. And the reserve will suffer as a result in the immediate future. But eventually, the numbers of the animals will decrease, and it will become almost a natural succession. But we're going to have to be willing to live with it and deal with it for the amount of time it takes for that natural succession to take place. So the elephants are going to decrease in numbers, as will the other animal populations, because of the decrease in food availability. Then, eventually, the food availability will begin slowly to recover. And as a result, then obviously all the animals will recover as a result. But that length of time that succession phase is going to undertake will most likely be in excess of 100 years. So it won't be in our lifetime, and it needs to obviously be put down to that kind of succession planning. So it's interesting, but we'll obviously have to just wait and see what happens. But that's what I believe will happen. And the degradation of a particular area can be very quick, but the recovery can take sometimes 10 times as long, if not more. So are we willing to wait that long? That therein, I think, is the question.
Did you know that the WildEarth team makes weekly behind the safari content? Would you like to get to know the WildEarth family better? See how we live,
This is Igor's bedroom.
learn about our production process, and see the antics that happen off camera. Sign up to be an explorer and you will get access to all this content and more.
Wow, it's really putting on a show here at Jamala. It's nice just to scan around as well, just to make sure we're not missing anything. As I say, without that peripheral vision, we can never be sure. And we're often surprised when we're concentrated on one side. Move the camera to the other side, and there's something we've been missing. So, and when you see the arid sort of nature of the area now, you've got to think that if the rains don't come and it doesn't sort of restore the vegetation to good quality for the animals, which would then gain strength pretty quickly, because currently they would most likely be under quite a bit of stress um, as the months continue through the dry season and the quality of the feed becomes worse and worse. Then they're surviving on less and less, and their body's taking more and more strain. Then what you start finding is they start succumbing to most particularly the parasites that they will be present, most notably ticks. And they'll then start falling foul to the sicknesses that they carry and the viruses, etc., that they harbor because of their lack of condition, because of their lack of strength, etc. That's where they start to succumb to these particular problems. And that then does sort of bring through that natural succession or survival of the fittest. And only the strongest will survive that period until the food actually recovers as a result of the rain finally arriving. And then those genes will be passed through. It is the natural order of things, but we do hope that the rains come sooner rather than later. Okay, so wonderful to see so many animals here at Jamala in the Madikwe Game Reserve in the northwest. But we won't spend too much time. We've got too many other places to go to. So without further ado, I think let's go back to Kenya and Africam Old Donyo. Where we've got our giants present at the Waterhole. I think this is another bull. I don't think it's the same one, or is it? He's got similar sized tusks, but he just seems a whole lot bigger. But I think maybe it's just because he's come closer to the camera. Lots of giraffe now, and we've got the tallest land mammal in the world with the biggest as well. Now, just looking at that giraffe when it flicks, it's always perplexed me, and I've been wondering about this for many years. Why they do this flick? It's not always as significant as other times, but there, even that one, it pulled its head up and then did a little flick at the end. Could it be that the water runs into its nose? I was thinking more about along the lines of the blood vessels and the valves that they sort of slow when they put their heads down to drink, and having it having something to do with that when they lift their head back up and then they flick their head to achieve something within that system. Oh, and I think the elephant now playing games with these giraffes, spraying them. Or is it something a lot more simple that I've overlooked? Maybe the water is running into their nose, and so they're flicking their nose, the head, to flick the water out of their nose. Because immediately after that, you'll then see them, without a shadow of a doubt, all of them, after the flick, they stand up straight and then they pick their nose with their tongue. Could it be that they're getting the water out of their nose? You see the flick and wait for the tongue or the nose pick. It's sticking its tongue up its nose, and I'm thinking, as a revelation, it's normally the simplest thing that is the actual answer. Maybe it's as simple as that. It's just water dribbling into the nostrils, so it's flicking it out as well as licking it out. And look at these oryx now, the fringe-eared oryx, or East African oryx, old name, of course. Much thinner black band than you see on the South African oryx, or the oryx gazella. And not as striking colors, just a little bit more bland. Not to say they're any less special, but therein are the differences. Wow, it's amazing, this angle. It really makes you feel like you're there. But even better that the animals don't know that we're there. So Dave Wilson, thanks for your comment, and yeah, it's stunningly beautiful here. It's an absolutely amazing spot, and glad you could join us. So Gary, the signs that you would look for to know if an elephant is sort of entering its heyday, not its heyday, its latter years, and that it's getting very old, you would obviously see a drop in their condition, because at around about 50 years of age or so, they get their last set of teeth. And then once that wears down, which can take an amount of time, they obviously then are unable to chew their food properly. And it happens, as I say, so slowly but surely they're not able to chew their food properly, and their condition shows as a result. So when you start seeing elephants with their hip bones showing, it's generally one of those malnourished elephants as a result of age. You can obviously tell if it's a youngster that is now under condition because it's not getting enough food. That's easy to tell. But a nice big bull like this, you can just tell in his demeanor that he's healthy. There's he's got good movement of the ear flaps, his trunk, everything is fine. He's not aggressive towards the other animals, which you might also find is one of the signs of an old bull or even female. Bulls generally do move solitary on their own when they're of age. So that's not a sign in itself. But if a female is on her own, this is also one of the things to look out for, because she would have been left alone because she maybe struggles to keep up with the herd, and she's obviously feeling the results of her malnutrition, and her hips will start to show quite evidently as well. Then, when you look at their dung and you see them dropping dung balls, you'll see that the food is not being chewed. It's literally full seed pods, full sticks, actually full leaves, and it's quite a sort of slop, but with all these full intact parts of vegetation. So these are all the signs that you look for, and the aggression will also start to come from them because they obviously feel unwell. They don't feel nice. Their body is probably becoming sore in their joints. So those are the signs that you would be looking for. Also, lots of leaking from the temporal gland, because this is a sign of stress. But you can see even a little bit of signs of that on this particular animal. Sometimes, even when they get hot, they might leak from that gland. But when they are in those periods or in their latter years, it can be quite excessive because they're under extreme amounts of stress. They're not getting enough food, and whatever food they do get, they're not absorbing it. So their condition drops. The dung is fully and intact, leaking from the temporal gland, and their general behavior. So those are all the signs to look for an old individual, be it male or female. Oh, on that occasion, I think he missed his mouth. Now it's fun time. Bit of spray time, cooling down. Maybe he'll do quite a bit of it. Spraying himself on the side, under his belly, behind his ears, and sometimes also over the back. This is the best time when elephants are next to the waterhole. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this elephant bull.
Stay up to date with the latest happenings at WildEarth. Discover what goes on behind the scenes and get a weekly recap of the best moments on the channel.
He's got it! And he's straight up a tree!
Sign up to be an explorer and receive our newsletter written just for you and sent straight to your inbox every week. WildEarth Explorers, a club for people who are passionate about nature.
Thank you for joining us and have a fantastic morning.
So nice to have this eland join, and lots of oxpeckers. Busy trying to get all the parasites, but there can be a little bit of an irritation, especially when they start climbing into their ears. So, SDB, your question around tuskers. And I'm just trying to understand the real part of your question. They absolutely are respected by all other elephants. It depends, because you know some of the other tuskers here there's quite a few of them, but generally the bigger the tusks, the bigger the elephant. So it's normally the bigger elephants that are the most respected and the more dominant. So the tuskers fall into that category, but it's not always the case. Sometimes you can have a tusker that big tusker that might be challenged, and even have one of these tusks broken off. I think it does hamper them a little bit in the fact that their endurance to fight might be less than a bull of the same size with smaller tusks. because he's got less to, hold up with his head. However, maybe the tusker with those bigger tusks can do more damage and have further reach. It all depends with that. But in general, I would have to say, yeah, absolutely, they are respected just because of the sheer size of them. And that's on average. But they can be taken down a notch in the hierarchy by elephants of same size with smaller tusks. So, but let's leave the generality in it, and I'll say yes.
Get ready for your daily dose of African wildlife magic. Be enchanted by the intimate moments shared by the animals as they drink, play, and interact in their natural habitat. With our daily wildlife videos, you'll experience the thrill of safari adventures without ever having to leave your seat. Let the wild adventure unfold right before your eyes. Africam, always live, always wild.
So just still enjoying our time with this big friendly giant. I'm sure he wouldn't always be friendly, especially when he's in must or there's some eligible females about. But for now, he's exactly that. Valerie, you're very welcome and thank you for your very kind comment. Awesome. Well, I do try my best, and I'm glad you enjoy it. So I normally try and talk about some kind of ecological concept or just approach a subject and then let it lead through into the whole show and expand on it and chat about it and discuss it. Today, because I've been away for a week on Amakala, I thought I just wanted to let it flow and we'll chat about whatever arises or whatever the comments suggest that I should start moving with. And it's been fabulously entertaining. And I think I'll obviously revisit that kind of concept again tomorrow, which is when I will be on again. I'll be on for the next few days, so we do have time to sort of approach these different ecological principles or whatever else I can conjure up in the meantime. But I always let the wildlife sort of drive those ideas and discussions as they present their behavior in the different ways that we can expect, or they do things differently to what we've ever known to for it to be. So I hope that you keep joining us on live at the Waterhole and keep seeing what comes down to drink. It's obviously a lot of a much different pace to the sunrise and sunset safari, but it does give us an opportunity to spend more time in the sightings and also to have much longer discussions about what the animals are doing or whatever it might be. So nice that you've been jumping on board with us, and I hope that long may it continue. It's always interesting watching elephants with the movements of their trunk, and just watching it there, it obviously does get tiresome, moving this appendage about. So you can often see he just rests it down a little bit, and then when he does pick it up, you can really get the impression of a slinky toy. All the wrinkles sort of move up as it, and we'll wait for it when it does then finally lift up and spray the water into its mouth. It really does look like a slinky toy, and extreme amount of muscles within that trunk. It's absolutely incredible. More muscles in that trunk than we have in our entire bodies. So, and today, just about at the start of the show, we had elephants, and very nice that we can also finish with one. And this big guy's really put on a show for us and kept me thoroughly entertained. So I hope you've all enjoyed the show. As always, later on today there will be the Sunset Safari starting at 2:30, and then tomorrow morning there will be the Sunrise Safari starting at 6:30. Straight after the Sunrise Safari, finishing at 9:30, we go straight into live at the Waterhole, where I will be with you once more. So I hope to have you on board tomorrow once again, and we can see what animals are going to come down to drink. That's the bonus. We get to do it all again tomorrow. So thank you for joining us, to you the viewers. Of course, we always got to say thanks to the wildlife as the stars of the show, and then the whole team of WildEarth behind the scenes making everything possible. I've got the easy job. I just sit here and talk nonsense. Some would say it's not nonsense. My wife would, but yeah, I do try my best. Anyway, folks, that's it from me. My name's Ralph Kirsten. See you tomorrow. Cheers.